"1542 The Purge" is the second book in the Micklegate series. It is set in Tudor York, telling the story of a group of misfits who are tasked with thwarting a threat to the fabric of the nation. Uncannily, they eventually find favour with King Henry VIII. One of our heroes, Silas, is an autistic waif, an orphan who finds favour with Mayor Robert Hall, for whom he runs errands. Somewhat deluded, Silas sees these as essential missions and soon believes himself to be a lord. He becomes well known in York. Some show deference and call him Lord Silas. To most, he is simply Lord Silas. In this excerpt, Sir Anthony Basque has been murdered, and poor Silas has been tasked with observing his embalming. Silas followed the instructions along Petergate and then along Walmgate Bar. He saw the empty barrow outside and decided he would just wait and pretend that the barber surgeon never turned up. Or perhaps I could tell Robert I was lost, he thought. The door was unexpectedly thrown open and a man emerged wearing a neck-to-toe leather apron that was covered with designer hues of body parts and fluids. Silas stared at the apron. He stirred and stirred until he felt sick. "Well, get in, you lad. May's paying good money, so you better observe." Silas, now completely divested of any ideas that would get him out of this predicament, and with his eyes closed, followed him in. This overzealous butcher didn't give his name, but the premises alone told Silas that this man was the real deal. And he was scary. He had bushy hair that was several shades of brown, red, grey and black. Or it could just been full of bodily shite from his clients, presumed Silas. He spoke like a wild man, enthusing about every aspect of his art. He manically gesticulated as he showed Silas his workshop, his tools. Silas lasted for almost 5 minutes before he asked for a seat, and it was at this point that he found a stool, and at the same time the surgeon whipped the sackcloth off the body of Sir Anthony Basque. Silas's eyes came back up from his feet to encounter Basque's current disposition. Now completely exposed, he was a thawing, pungent and incredibly stiff, dirty corpse. His face was contorted, with his eyes looking upward as if to reference his head wound, and a grimace that looked as though he was pleased to see Silas again. His tongue was entirely doing a thing of its own. "Oh, in God's name, can't you at least close his eyes?" "What for?" asked Viscera, for this was the unpleasant nickname given to him by, surprisingly, those who respected him most. "He can't see," he added calmly, almost as if Silas didn't know. "Oh, I know he can't. He can't see," added Silas, almost at breaking point. Just close his eyes." "Can't, and stop making a fuss, lad. He'll not hurt thee. Thou don't expect me to do it all on my own, dost thou? You hurt me as lad." Yes, said Silas. "But I do errands, missions. I don't do this." "Ah, just jesting, lad. I'll get started. Thou just sit there and watch." Watch, he thought. I'd much rather be in battle alongside Eric and Thomas Farrier. So Silas furiously watched, with half an eye open, but another eye and a half on the door. The door. That beautiful exit beyond which sanity reigned. Throughout, he had calculated how long it would take him to bolt to and beyond that door. He was now facing almost 2 hours of terrifying butchery, tempered by care and caution. Viscera started by gently washing the body in warm water, whilst constantly stoking a growling fire in the corner, which Silas thought was the only redeeming feature of this hellhole. Viscera hummed as he washed away the crusty, slowly melting blood and brain matter, and then the congealed blood which seemed to have visited every part of Sir Anthony Basque's torso. He then began to carefully undress him, the outer layers crunching, crackling as if separated from the layers of underclothing, dried sweat and blood beneath. His privy regions in particular gave forth an almighty stink, as the body had been completely unattended since his final bowel purge, which was hopefully post-death. As a final underlay of clothing was ripped away, parts of his flesh came with it, and somewhere around this time, the surgeon started shouting out random words and instructions. It had now become a bizarre ritual, and the visitor had had enough. So again, he part stood up and asked to leave, but it was as if nothing had been said. Still looking at his feet, he thought to sit again, but was suddenly interrupted. "Blade!" he shouted, and grabbed the first small but sharp razor. And as Silas thought to look away again, Viscera decided to give Bast a shave and a haircut. After all, this was what Viscera would have done most of the time. Silas began to thank God, presuming that, once cleaned up, he would at last be put in a box and hidden under something, anything, and to him it didn't matter what. Then silence again. Silas slumped. "North!" Viscera declared, and did a short but merry dance. He nodded again toward the whereabouts of the knife, and then again until Silas took the hint. Unfortunately, he was glued. If he couldn't get through that door, the best option was staying on the chair and looking down. "North!" he repeated. So Silas jumped up, stretched his arm out to grab the handle of this curious instrument that combined both a straight and a jagged blade. "What on earth does he want a knife for?" thought Silas, as he handed it to Viscera, arm outstretched without looking at him. "Sit!" Of course, Silas was happy to comply. His sanctuary was that stool and the floor. Then he half stood again as he witnessed this maniac rip Anthony Bast's torso from his neck right down to his waist. This vision, added to the unbearable stench, left Silas wobbling. "Book it!" And Silas, having previously wondered why there was a bucket both on his right and on his left, chose one and emptied his own guts into it. As the room started to spin, his last vision was of the barber surgeon wielding an instrument that had a short wooden handle and a sharp metal scoop at the end of it. This was zealously plunged into Anthony's innards, and Viscera began to disembowel him. Thud. Silas hit the deck, and so assumed a position incredibly like that of the body, and Viscera laughed manically. Silas's tongue hung out, just like that of Bast, and his single but long lock of ginger hair had curled around his crown, much like Sir Anthony's head wound. Apart from the fact that Silas was still intact, the two lay alongside each other, one on the floor and one on the bench, as twins. Viscera completely removed all his client's organs, whistling as he completed the task. He continued to randomly shout out orders, but seemingly these were just for his own amusement. 40 minutes later, Bast was practically an empty vessel, his organs now residing close by in a lead-lined barrel. Viscera then looked at the well in the back of the body. Bast's entire blood supply had rested in one place just above his spine, but now looking like red currant jam. This, along with all other waste, including the encrusted clothing, was thrown onto the fire. Now the real embalming could be carried out. Rose petal water was used liberally to scent the body. Myrrh, musk and a variety of balms were added everywhere. Viscera left these to soak in and so turned to the eyes. A few stitches here, a few more on the lips, and Bast was already looking in better nick than Silas. It was hard to reconcile the contrast between the rough handling of the innards and the gentle touch applied to the dressing, scenting and embalming of the corpse. But this procedure from this point onward was somewhat artistic. Viscera massaged his sweet-smelling applications throughout the body, and then most bizarrely picked up a round but weighty package, clearly not previously part of Sir Anthony's body, that was tied up with string and then covered with cerecloth, a waxed fabric, and very carefully placed it inside the cavity where Bass's organs had earlier resided. He then carefully sewed up the chasm. Next, Viscera wrapped the whole body in cerecloth until Bass was starting to look like a mummy. He stood over his masterpiece, looked at the still unconscious Silas and smiled. He opened the door and he wheeled in a box on a wooden bier, dragged the corpse across, nailed on the lid and wheeled it out again. The barber surgeon had completely cleaned his workspace when finally Silas sat up again. Oh, is it all? Where is he? Aha, all done, laddie. Very pleased indeed. Some of my best work. Silas felt extremely unwell and seemed to hurt everywhere, but made an effort to stand and brush off some remaining parts of his one-time travelling companion. As they went outdoors, Silas observed the coffin and bier and was taken back by the overwhelming sweet smells. Now listen, lad, he'll only stay this fresh for a week, so they should make haste. See that over there? He pointed to the barrel. That's lead-lined and will last forever. Oh, very good, said Silas with interest, and no clue as to what he meant. He paused and then added, What is it? All his innards. What? Oh, no. What on earth are his innards doing in the... Why aren't they in him? If you drop again, lad, I'm leaving you here. My job's done. But to answer the question, I can't preserve him with that lot in there. However, what I suggest is this. They can be buried here. There'll be a proper mass for them. Common practice it is. But you must tell his missus that they've been consecrated. Very important, that. Silas had been teased so many times in his life that he just stared at this crazy man. Then at the box. Then at the barrel. No, he can't have made it up, he told himself. The horrors he had learned this day. Oh, yes, keep him here in your... I'll make sure the Mayor and Lady Bass know. Thank you very much. Very well, Biss replied, and he pointed at the coffin again. But he won't last forever. Cost too much to let him completely and all. Mayor has already paid a small fortune for this. Thankfully, for a few moments, Silas's attention turned to Mayor Robert. His employer continued to surprise him with his Christian generosity. He was one of the wealthiest merchants in York, but all the same, this was quite magnanimous. However, the clandestine package secreted inside Bass was never mentioned, and it was at this junction that Silas could hear the familiar sounds of a horse with cart. It was Bayard, Silas told himself, there and then, that there could be no more beautiful sight in the world apart from Winfrith herself than Bayard and his smelly cart. Ho! Shouted Bayard as he saw his highly stressed fellow agent before him. Bayard, my good man, oh thank God. It was as if Bayard was a cherub birthed from heaven that day and landing at Silas's feet. Now there's a line I never thought I would write. Please make sure you like and subscribe to the Meet the Authors YouTube channel to see further video tutorials, tips and tricks. You can also find us on Instagram and Facebook.